Hey, RetconRaider here. Today we're delving back into Design Document 4, which covers the tribal village shared by the Blackfoot and Hangdog tribes. Last time, we talked about the background of the location, as well as the role it was intended to play in Van Buren. So this time, we'll be looking at some of the actual in-game content that the location would have had to offer. First, let's start off by looking at the general planned layout for the location. As I briefly touched on in the previous video, the tribal village is a repurposed pre-war mining town that later served as a small ski resort. The basic layout of the location reflects this, a central walled village made up of pre-war buildings, surrounded by hills dotted with pre-war cabins and old mining tunnels. Now there's actually a pretty decent amount of content that was planned for this location, especially if we count all of the incomplete or cut content mentioned in the design document. So in this video, we'll mainly be focused on the Blackfoot village and its residents. We'll cover the hangdogs and the various caves and tunnels around the village next time. The main village is where the player would have interacted with the bulk of the Blackfoot Tribe. This area is lined with a makeshift wall, accessible from the south through a reinforced bus chassis they've repurposed as a gate. They raise and slaughter Brahmin near the south side of the village, and handle crops along the inside of the western wall. The old convenience store in the northeast corner of the village has also been repurposed to hold their current slave stock. This is also where the Blackfoot do the bulk of their trading, maintaining a small trading post near the center of town, where Cortijo offers general goods and Dominic handles the slave trading. Other buildings in this area serve as homes for some of the most prominent members of the tribe, such as the tribe's current leader, Kurisu, their raid leader, Craig, as well as Marin, the daughter of Hecate, who is currently serving as their shaman. The village extends into the east hillside area, where many of the lesser members of the tribe live in old tourist cabins. Perhaps the most notable feature here is the Furnace Cave, which the villagers have repurposed for smelting and reforging salvaged metal. Garon the weapon maker also lives here, forging spears and blades for the rest of the tribe. So, now that we know about the location's layout, what could the player actually do here? Well, let's start with the biggest quest first, the leadership struggle between Kurisu and Chagas. Kurisu is a former slave, perhaps best known for being Sulik's long-lost sister from Fallout 2. And Fallout 3 would have revealed that Sulik was never successful in rescuing her. Instead, she found her way to the Blackfoot Tribe as a slave, where she won her freedom, proved her worth as a warrior, and eventually seized control of the tribe when its previous leader died. Chagas, on the other hand, is the brother of the former leader, and control of the tribe would have naturally passed on to him if he had been around when his brother had died. Unfortunately, Chagas was being held by the NCR at the time for attacking one of their caravans, and this in turn led to him being part of the group that was deliberately infected with the new plague and later imprisoned in the Tibbetts facility. This means that he's one of the former prisoners that the player needs to return to the Tibbetts facility, but the player would need to resolve the power struggle first, unless they planned on simply attacking the village and taking Chagas by force. Resolving the quest properly required the player to pick a side, either Kurisu or Chagas, and then deciding how to support them. Leadership of the Blackfoots is determined through trials of survival in combat, and Kurisu has the edge there. Chagas is a skilled warrior and outdoorsman, but he's sick and a bit out of practice due to his time in captivity, so Kurisu would beat him if he challenged her. Chagas would offer the player rewards for helping him assume his rightful place as leader of the tribe, even promising to temporarily accompany them back to the Tibbetts facility if necessary. If the player chose to assist Chagas, then they'd have to find a way to help him win the leadership challenge. This could be done by using combat skills to teach him more about fighting, or by using stealth or outdoorsman skills to help him with the survival challenges, and science-minded characters could also use drugs to artificially boost his performance. It would also be important to have at least some speech skills to convince Chagas to wait until he was fully prepared to make the challenge, because otherwise he'd be likely to pick a fight with Kurisu before he was actually ready, securing her position as the tribe's leader. There were also plans to implement a quest involving the player supporting Kurisu against Chagas, but no details are given. The document only contains a simple placeholder, requesting further details from the writer. But it's probably safe to assume that if Karisu won the challenge, then she would either turn Chagas over to the player, or Chagas would leave the village in disgrace, making it easier for the player to capture him and take him back to the Tibbetts facility. Regardless of who ended up winning the challenge, the player would be able to convince the new leader to declare them as a friend of the Blackfoot, which would come with a small number of benefits, such as discounts with the local vendors. Some mention is also made of the player being able to theoretically become a housemate to the leader, which would earn them further respect from the rest of the tribe. An interesting side quest related to this main quest involves convincing Chagas to settle for a lesser position within the tribe. He wants to be leader, but he's also willing to settle for a lesser position as long as it still affords him the power and respect he believes he deserves. Since he has more knowledge and skill with firearms than the rest of his tribe, he's well suited for a position as the tribe's gunsmith, but the player would need to find a way to convince him to settle for this role. The player could approach this in many ways, such as by intimidating or persuading Chagas to take on the lesser role, or by bribing him with a suitably lavish gift. Players with sufficient crafting skills could also teach him more about building guns, which could sway him towards taking on the gunsmith position. If Chagas accepted his new role as the tribe's gunsmith, then this would make the tribe stronger over time, slowly improving the quality of the weaponry that their warriors carried. If the player managed to get on Karisu's good side, they would also be able to potentially recruit her as a companion. This would be tricky though, because as the leader of the tribe, she wouldn't be willing to simply abandon her post. She would only be recruitable if the player established a second-in-command to lead the village in her absence, someone like Chagas, for example. There are also several other notes in the design document about elements of this quest which were incomplete or undecided. For example, an entire section marked for deletion covers a quest that would have allowed the player to challenge Karisu for leadership of the tribe in a fashion similar to the one used by Chagas. Some notes in the document also expressed concern that it might be too easy to get Chagas back to the Tibbetts facility. These notes proposed adding additional complications, such as the player finding out that Chagas had already been sold off as a slave before they got to the village. This would require the player to track him down before he would initiate the proposed Leadership Challenge questline. Other quests around the Blackfoot village were relatively smaller in scope, though not always in consequence. Many of them involved helping to secure the Blackfoot Tribe's position in the Colorado area by improving the way that they did things. Some mention is made of the player being able to convince them to stop giving tribute to Caesar's Legion, but that was mostly marked for deletion. But some of the remaining quests did involve having to deal with Marin, the daughter of Hecate who had been forced upon the tribe under the threat of being cursed by her patron. One of the simpler quests involving Marin focused on her dispute with a Blackfoot tribal named Fast Hands. Fast Hands broke his leg in a climbing accident, but Marin refuses to treat him. If the player had sufficient skills, they could treat his injury themselves, but otherwise they would have to find a way to resolve the dispute. Marin would claim that Fast Hands had disrespected Hecate, but in truth, Fast Hands and Marin were secretly having an affair, and Marin is upset that he decided to break up with her. A player with appropriate speech skills could convince the two to make amends, and Marin would finally be willing to see to Fast Hands' recovery. A more ambitious quest would involve convincing Marin to leave the village. The Blackfoot see their pact with the Daughters of Hecate as a necessary evil, but would welcome the chance to be rid of Marin as long as it wouldn't bring about Hecate's wrath. The player could theoretically convince Marin to leave using speech skills, or they could use her allergy towards dogs against her. This would only provide a temporary solution since the Daughters would eventually send a new representative to replace her, but the Blackfoot would still be happy with the temporary reprieve. Commerce-minded players could instead focus on helping Garun, the tribe's weapon maker. At its simplest, this could involve helping him catch up with his current work by repairing weapons and carting supplies for him, and he would also ask the player to fetch him some booze to enjoy in his downtime. But more ambitious players could also get him some proper tools or even teach him basic gunsmithing. In the short term, this would allow the player to leave gun parts with Garun and he would assemble them for the player. In the long term, this would improve the weaponry used by the tribe as a whole. similar to the improvements seen if the player had convinced Chagas to take on the role of the tribe's gunsmith. It's even possible that having both Chagas and Buren making guns would improve the tribe's armaments more quickly than usual. But the tribe would always be on the lookout for more weapons, with Karisu or Chagas asking the player to deliver guns in shipments of 20 for some easy experience points and reputation with the tribe. The tribe could also start manufacturing and trading guns with other settlements if they could further improve their manufacturing capacity. While they had a cave dedicated towards smelting and forging components, the facilities were relatively crude, and industrious players could significantly improve it. A player with technical skills could theoretically improve the smelter, but first they would have to convince the forge master to shut it down for a few days. Assuming they could keep her cooperative long enough to finish the upgrades, the Blackfoot Tribe's manufacturing capabilities would significantly improve. Another relatively simple technical task would be to repair the air pump in the furnace cave to help keep the workers from being sickened by the smoke and fumes. A simpler task, especially for combat-oriented characters, would be to help the Blackfoot Tribe clear the spore plants out of one of the gardens along their western wall. One of the villagers accidentally planted some spore plant fruits, and now the things have made it too dangerous to approach the garden. But the issue could easily be resolved with a bit of turn-based violence. Another similarly simple task would be to investigate a mysterious metal bug that Chagas encountered out in the wilderness. This would turn out to be a quarantine robot sent by Odysseus to recover Chagas, but the other villagers managed to disable it with a few lucky attacks. An opportunistic player could negotiate for directions to the robot, where they could theoretically salvage it for ammunition and parts. Less scrupulous players could instead indulge in some more villainous quests, most notably by talking to Craig about helping out with the Blackfoot raids. Similar to working with the slavers in Fallout 2, this would send the player on short, repeatable quests where they'd get to raid caravans or villages for some quick loot and experience points, as long as they didn't mind the hit to their karma and reputation. There were at least 4 other minor quests that were planned for this location as well, but they were all marked for deletion. The first of these quests involved helping the guards to find a way to keep themselves entertained during long shifts, by teaching them how to play various games or even by teaching them how to read. The second quest involved building a still in the village, which would allow the Blackfoot to start manufacturing and trading booze, but would also cause the rest of their trade to suffer as the villagers started struggling with alcoholism. The other 2 deleted quests also involved upgrading things around town. One involved upgrading the Blackfoot Tribe's Outdoorsman Lab, which would theoretically give the player a place to handle certain types of crafting, and the other involved repairing the resort's old ski lift, but no details are given on exactly what benefit this would have provided. Another deleted quest was rather sinister in nature and involved poisoning the tribe. The document doesn't offer any reason for this course of action, but it would have involved the player contaminating the water in both the runoff barrels as well as the storage cave. It's possible that this was a quest originally intended to be given by one of the other tribes that was ultimately cut from the game, such as the Iron Rails. Perhaps the most ambitious quest in the Blackfoot village, aside from helping to determine their leader, was to encourage or discourage their slave trading practices. To the Blackfoot, slave trading is just a way of life, and one that they don't see as being inherently objectionable or evil. The player could theoretically use diplomacy or intimidation to force the tribe to focus on water trading and ranching instead of slave trading, but this would be a very difficult task. The player could also use stealth to free or poison the slaves, using diplomacy afterwards to convince the tribe that it was the will of the spirits. The latter approach would have a better chance of working, but would still be quite a monumental task. A more direct approach would be to speak with Karisu herself about the matter, assuming she was still the tribe's leader. As a former slave herself, Karisu was made bitter by her experience, and now perpetuates the same misery that she feels she was put through. A player with appropriate skills could dissuade her from this path, convincing her to turn the tribe away from slavery, which would open up the possibility of normal trade with other settlements. But more villainous players could instead encourage her hatred, which in turn would drive her to redouble the tribe's slave trading efforts, potentially making greater profits, but also making the village a more miserable place to live. And this ultimately would be one of the biggest factors deciding the ultimate fate of the Blackfoot Tribe, assuming the player didn't just wipe them out. If the player encouraged their slave trading, then the village would eventually become the center of a small but dangerous state, avoided by outsiders. If the player discouraged their slave trading, but gave them no alternatives, then their village would instead slowly die out as their inability to pay tribute to Caesar's legion eventually took its toll. But under the most ideal circumstances, the village would prosper, becoming a part of the greater Colorado community as ranchers and water traders. So there were multiple potential end states for the tribe, both good and bad. Sadly, based on what we learned from Fallout New Vegas, the official fate of the Blackfoot is something else entirely. As the first tribe to join with Caesar, they became the foundation of his legion in the official continuity, meaning that the events portrayed in the Van Buren documents likely never took place, or, at the very least, took place under heavily modified circumstances. But what about the Hangdog tribe? Well, this video has already run long enough, so we'll get to them next time. For now, this is RetconRaider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Fallout Van Buren, you can check out all 700 pages of the design documents for yourself by visiting the Fan Run Wikis. Links are in the description.